Okay, today we move through the noise of modern life, where so often the impulse is to shift blame outward. We blame our stress on deadlines, our unhappiness on others, our lack of peace on the chaos of the world. Yet every time we surrender to this habit, something subtle but profound slips away: our inner strength. In a society that moves too fast, that rewards distraction, it is easy to forget that true power is not found in what happens to us, but in how we respond. Welcome, dear friend, to Stoic Dharma, where ancient wisdom meets the challenges of modern life. This is a space for calm narration, inspirational storytelling, and timeless reflection. Today's journey takes us into the heart of Stoic philosophy, to explore why true power comes not from control over the outside world, but from taking responsibility for your actions daily. In this stillness, we uncover what Marcus Aurelius once embodied, what Seneca once whispered to his students. Strength begins when we no longer seek excuses, but instead, we claim ownership of our choices. Responsibility is not a heavy chain, but a key. The Stoics believed it unlocked freedom, not captivity. When you take ownership of your choices, you are no longer a prisoner of circumstance. You see yourself not as tossed about by fate, but as someone who stands firmly within it, shaping meaning from every moment. From here, we turn to the heart of Stoic philosophy. Responsibility is not about controlling the storm, but about steering your ship with clarity through it. To the Stoic mind, life was not defined by what happens, but by how we meet it. This perspective reframes difficulty, transforming it from enemy into teacher. Imagine someone who always shifts blame, on traffic for their lateness, on their boss for their stress, on the weather for their mood. Each excuse feels natural, even reasonable, yet every complaint quietly hands away a piece of their strength. Over time, this habit becomes a pattern, a way of living that traps them in resentment instead of action. What they fail to see is that freedom is inseparable from responsibility. Without owning their choices, their autonomy gradually dissolves. By refusing responsibility, they surrender the very power that could liberate them and transform their circumstances into growth. Epictetus once explained that while external events lie outside our control, our judgments remain fully our own. The responsibility for how we interpret life cannot be outsourced. In that space of decision, where thought meets event, resides our true power. This is the foundation of resilience. The Stoics knew that the world often feels overwhelming, unfair, unpredictable, but they refused to give away their agency. Seneca reminded himself that even in chains, a person could still claim mastery of their mind. This mastery, though invisible, is the essence of responsibility. It requires vigilance but offers unshakable strength. Consider how often you say, "I had no choice." The phrase feels natural, but is it true? The Stoic response would be quiet and firm. There is always a choice. It may not be the choice you want, but the decision of how to respond belongs entirely to you. Responsibility begins here. But there's another layer. Responsibility is not merely about enduring life's burdens. It is the deliberate act of standing face to face with yourself. When you take responsibility, you affirm, "This life is mine." No excuse, no diversion, no hidden corner where blame can be stored. Freedom and responsibility walk together. This is why the Stoics linked responsibility with strength. When Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, he did not complain of the empire's weight. Instead, he reminded himself daily that he chose how to bear it. The choice itself created his strength. Every decision to stand tall was a victory of character. Now ask yourself gently, do you live as master of your choices or as a hostage to circumstance? This is not a question for judgment, but for reflection, because each moment, however ordinary, presents you with an opportunity to practice. Responsibility lives not only in grand gestures, but in the smallest acts. Think of your daily life. You wake tired, the world pulls at you, responsibilities pile up. It is easy to say the day dictates your mood. Yet if you pause, breathe, and choose deliberately how to step forward, you have claimed ownership of the morning. This subtle shift transforms your experience. Responsibility is also clarity. It allows you to distinguish what belongs to you and what does not. Epictetus taught that peace arises from knowing the line between what is yours to carry and what is not. To assume responsibility for another's thoughts or the weather outside is to misplace energy. But to neglect responsibility for your own actions is to abandon your strength. The Stoics asked us to draw this boundary with care, for it defines the architecture of our inner life. Within that boundary, responsibility does not limit, it liberates. It gives you command of yourself in a world you cannot command. Some people fear responsibility because it feels like blame. Yet the Stoics saw it differently. Responsibility was dignity. To say, "I am responsible," is not to confess guilt, but to acknowledge power. You cannot always choose the script, but you choose how to perform upon life's stage. That choice is freedom. Notice how modern life often tempts us away from this principle. Algorithms encourage us to blame the feed, the culture, the noise. We scroll endlessly, thinking we are powerless. But responsibility whispers otherwise. You choose when to pause, when to engage, when to step away. Even in the digital storm, you hold the helm. The essence of responsibility is also the essence of mindfulness. To live responsibly is to notice each moment and to respond with awareness rather than reaction. This does not mean perfection, but practice. Each misstep is not failure, but another chance to return. Responsibility makes mindfulness practical, woven into daily living. Responsibility in this sense is a kind of inner sovereignty. External forces may roar and collide, yet they no longer dictate your state of mind. You stand steady, rooted in choice rather than circumstance. Like Marcus Aurelius, who wrote by lamplight while wars raged and plagues spread, you discover a calm center untouched by chaos. Though the empire around him trembled, within himself he reigned, a reminder that true authority is the mastery of one's own soul. Responsibility is, at its heart, the reclamation of your life. Without it, days blur into excuses, and excuses blur into years. With it, life sharpens, choices gain weight, actions acquire meaning. Responsibility restores the thread that connects decision to destiny. This is why the Stoics called it strength, not burden. As we close this first reflection, pause with the question, are you the author of your actions or a character written by circumstance? To answer truthfully is the beginning of wisdom, and wisdom, like strength, begins not in controlling the world, but in claiming responsibility for how you walk through it. To understand why responsibility holds such power, we must step back into the history of Stoic philosophy. The roots of this tradition stretch to Athens around 300 BCE, when Zeno of Citium taught his followers beneath the painted porch. For him, philosophy was not abstract theory but a practice of life. Responsibility, he believed, was the soil from which freedom could grow. From here we turn to Epictetus, a man born into slavery. Though his body was bound, his mind remained his own. He taught that every external circumstance can be stripped away, yet the ability to choose one's response is unassailable. His words remind us that true accountability begins not with wealth or status, but with the recognition of what lies within your control. Now imagine the world of Seneca, a Roman senator navigating the turbulence of power and betrayal. Surrounded by opulence, political danger, and personal loss, he continually returned to a single truth. Responsibility for one's character cannot be delegated. Even amid luxury and peril, he wrote that the inner life is always in your hands. Marcus Aurelius carried this wisdom further. As emperor of Rome, he bore immense responsibilities over armies, provinces, and laws. Yet in his private reflections, he insisted the only thing fully his was the state of his mind. He reminded himself that no insult, no plague, no war could dictate his thoughts unless he allowed it. This was his discipline of accountability. The Stoics shared a vision that transcended time and circumstance. Whether slave, senator, or emperor, they recognized a boundary that cannot be crossed. Outside the boundary lie fate, fortune, and the behavior of others. Inside lies the realm of your choices, your judgments, your actions. Responsibility begins with acknowledging this invisible line. Consider how radical this idea was. In a world where most believed life was ruled by the gods, luck, or destiny, the Stoics declared that strength resided in your response. They did not deny suffering or loss. Rather, they insisted that how you carry them is what defines you. This was accountability as liberation. Responsibility in this sense was never a burden. It was the path to self-mastery. When Epictetus told his students that you cannot control events, only your attitude, he was not offering comfort but discipline. To live responsibly was to live with clarity. It demanded honesty about what is yours and what is not. But there's another layer. Responsibility also meant refusing to give power away. Every time you say they made me angry or this ruined my day, you surrender authority over your inner life. The Stoics taught that responsibility is reclaiming that authority. It is the act of saying, my emotions, my thoughts, my actions are mine to govern. In practice, this required a deep vigilance. Seneca warned against drifting, for drifting is the quiet loss of responsibility. Life pulls you into distraction, habit, and complaint. Without reflection, you become a passenger rather than the navigator of your journey. Responsibility was the anchor against this drift. Notice how this principle echoes across cultures. The Bhagavad Gita, a sacred Hindu text, tells us that one's duty is to act without attachment to the fruits of action. Like the Stoics, it separates what is yours, your intention, your discipline, from what is beyond you, the outcome. Responsibility is thus not the burden of results, but the clarity of effort. The historical backdrop matters too. Stoicism rose in a world of political uncertainty, shifting empires and personal vulnerability. Zeno, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus all lived amid upheaval. Their insistence on responsibility was not an escape, but a survival strategy. By rooting freedom in the self, they created an inner stability that no chaos could shake. This philosophy did not promise comfort. Instead, it offered strength. To take responsibility meant to stop blaming God's luck or society for your inner state. It was to live awake, with the steady awareness that every choice shapes your character. Responsibility, then, was a form of craftsmanship, the art of sculpting one's soul. From here, we must confront our own tendency to resist this teaching. Responsibility feels heavy because it removes excuses. Yet the Stoics remind us that the weight we feel is not punishment, but freedom disguised. When you stop scattering your agency outward, you discover the profound lightness of owning your life fully. Now imagine drawing a circle on the ground. Inside are your thoughts, words, and actions. Outside are other people's opinions, the economy, the weather, and the flow of history. The Stoics invite you to stand firmly inside that circle. Responsibility lives here, not in the endless chaos beyond. This simple exercise clarifies your world. In daily life, this means when challenges arise, you do not ask, why me, but rather, how will I meet this? Responsibility reframes problems into opportunities for virtue. Difficulty becomes practice, pain becomes teacher, and setbacks become exercises in patience and courage. Accountability transforms hardship into the forge of character. But there's another truth. Responsibility is not isolation. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that he was part of a larger human community. Responsibility for oneself was inseparable from responsibility to others. Your actions ripple outward, shaping families, cities, and generations. To own your choices is to recognize their impact on the wider world. So responsibility is both intimate and expansive. It begins with the inner discipline of thought and extends to the ethical responsibility of how you treat others. The Stoics saw no contradiction. To live responsibly was to honor your role in the cosmos while guarding the sovereignty of your soul. As this reflection draws to a close, the lesson sharpens. Responsibility is never about controlling all things. It is about recognizing what truly lies within your reach. In that space, accountability transforms into real strength. Beyond it, acceptance reveals itself as quiet wisdom. Joined together, strength and wisdom create an unshakable foundation, a way of living that sustains both inner freedom and lasting peace, even amid life's shifting storms. The Stoic vision of responsibility would remain only an idea if it did not touch the fabric of daily life. Theory, however elegant, means little without practice. Responsibility, in its essence, lives in the small and ordinary choices we make each day. These choices, though quiet, accumulate into the architecture of a life. From here, we turn to the simplest truth. Responsibility is not about great speeches or heroic gestures. It is about the moment when you choose honesty instead of excuse, patience instead of anger, clarity instead of confusion. These moments seem small, yet they are where the strength of Stoic philosophy becomes real. In work, responsibility begins when you stop blaming circumstances for your lack of progress. Perhaps the project is difficult, the deadlines unfair, the resources thin. Still, the Stoic asks, what belongs to you here? You cannot always control conditions, but you can control effort, discipline, and the integrity you bring to the task. Now imagine two colleagues. One spends energy pointing fingers, complaining, and waiting for rescue. The other accepts what cannot be changed and channels energy into what can be done. The first grows bitter, the second grows resilient. Responsibility transforms the same environment into two entirely different experiences of life. In relationships, responsibility means recognizing that your emotions are your own. It is tempting to say, you made me angry or they ruined my day, but the Stoic insists, your response is yours. Responsibility asks you to pause, breathe, and own your reaction. This pause becomes a doorway into deeper connection. When you take responsibility for your emotions, blame dissolves and understanding takes its place. Instead of reacting from impulse, you create space to choose compassion. Responsibility in relationships does not mean absorbing all fault, but it means not outsourcing your inner state to another. Love becomes steadier when grounded in this discipline. Responsibility also lives in the quiet realm of the self. Each evening, you might open a journal and reflect, how did I respond today? Where did I blame and where did I own? Journaling, a practice cherished by Marcus Aurelius himself, transforms accountability into habit. Each page becomes a mirror, reflecting both flaws and growth. This simple practice reveals patterns that otherwise remain hidden. Over time, you notice where you repeat excuses, where you shy away from ownership, where you lose patience, and slowly responsibility begins to take root. Journaling is not confession but cultivation, the deliberate act of shaping your inner garden with clarity. Another practice is premeditatio malorum, the Stoic art of imagining adversity before it arrives. Each morning you can ask, what difficulties might I face today? Who might test my patience? What obstacles might block my path? Responsibility grows stronger when it is prepared, not surprised. Anticipation makes room for calmer choices. This exercise does not create fear, but steadiness. When challenges arrive, you recognize them as familiar guests. You are less likely to complain, more likely to respond with patience. Responsibility becomes the habit of expecting difficulty and meeting it with grace, instead of lamenting its arrival. But there's another technique, perhaps the simplest yet the most transformative. It is the pause. Before sending the message, before raising your voice, before reacting in haste, pause. In that silence, responsibility returns. The pause gives you ownership of your next act. It reminds you that your actions, not impulses, define your character. Over time, these small practices accumulate. Journaling sharpens awareness, premeditatio malorum prepares resilience. The pause strengthens self-control. Together, they create a rhythm of responsibility woven into daily life. You do not need grand rituals. You need these quiet habits repeated with care. This is how Stoic philosophy becomes more than theory. Think again of the workplace. Imagine walking into a difficult meeting. Anxiety rises, and your first instinct is blame. The client is unreasonable, the manager unfair. But responsibility whispers, what is within my control? You take a pause, gather clarity, and speak with steadiness. In that moment, you have claimed power. In relationships, responsibility might appear when someone criticizes you. The impulse is to defend or strike back. Yet with responsibility, you pause and consider, what can I learn? How do I choose to respond? The relationship shifts, because instead of perpetuating conflict, you have broken the cycle with ownership and calm. In the solitude of the mind, responsibility means no longer running from yourself. Instead of drowning in distraction, you face your thoughts honestly. Journaling uncovers fears, the pause reveals choice, and premeditatio malorum steels you against tomorrow. Responsibility becomes a companion in your inner dialogue, a steady voice guiding you toward freedom. Now imagine how different life feels under this practice. Complaints lose their weight because you see that they do not serve you. Excuses lose their charm because they rob you of agency. Responsibility reshapes the ordinary day into a field of practice, where every choice strengthens character. This path is never easy. Responsibility is demanding, for it leaves no space to hide or escape. Yet within that demand lies deep liberation, because it breaks the draining cycle of blame. When you choose responsibility, life becomes simpler. You clearly see what belongs to you, and you accept the weight of it with dignity. Everything beyond your reach you let go. In this balance of holding and releasing, true freedom quietly takes root. Here lies the quiet paradox. When you take responsibility for your small daily choices, life feels lighter. You do not control the world, yet you control your steps. And step by step, you walk a path of integrity. Responsibility, once feared as burden, reveals itself as freedom's companion. As we close this reflection, remember that responsibility does not reside in the pages of philosophy alone. It lives in how you work, how you love, and how you meet yourself. Every pause, every choice, every written line of reflection is a practice of freedom. And in these practices, you build the life that is truly yours. Responsibility is not bound to one era. It is a thread woven through the lives of those who faced immense burdens, yet chose to stand firm. Across centuries, history offers us figures who remind us that true power is not in ruling the world, but in ruling the self. Their lessons echo into our present, asking us to pause and listen. Consider Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor of Rome. He carried the weight of an empire in his hands. Wars, plagues, and betrayals marked his reign. Yet in the solitude of his tent, he turned inward, writing to himself reminders of responsibility. His journal, later known as Meditations, was not for the world but for his own discipline. From these writings we glimpse a man who refused to surrender his mind to despair. Though surrounded by pressures beyond measure, he constantly returned to the Stoic principle. Control lies not in the chaos of events, but in how one responds. Responsibility was his anchor, even when storms threatened to consume everything he held dear. Now imagine the emperor during sleepless nights, reflecting on battles he could not fully command, on the plague he could not prevent. What remained his own was his duty, to act with justice, to live with integrity, to govern without surrendering to bitterness. This responsibility, not his crown, gave him strength. Centuries later, in a place of unspeakable darkness, Viktor Frankl embodied the same truth. Imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps, stripped of freedom, family, and dignity, he faced a reality where nearly everything was stolen from him. Yet within that horror, Frankl discovered a form of responsibility that no one could take. He realized that while he could not choose his suffering, he could choose his response to it. He described attitude as the last of human freedoms, the power to decide one's stance in the face of what cannot be controlled. In this choice lay an unshakable dignity, a responsibility that defined survival. Frankl's insight reminds us that responsibility is not merely about tasks or duties. It is about the innermost power to shape meaning. Even in despair, one can claim responsibility for one's outlook. This truth bridges the distance between emperor and prisoner, between history and modern life. It is timeless. From here we turn to our own age. The challenges may differ. No empire to govern, no camps to endure, but the demand for responsibility remains. Today, the forces that pull at us are subtler. Endless distractions, shifting opinions, the pressure of conformity. Responsibility asks us not to be carried away by these tides. When you scroll through streams of information, opinions clashing and emotions flaring, responsibility whispers, what will you allow to shape your mind? You cannot control the noise, but you can choose how deeply you let it enter. Responsibility in the modern age is about protecting the clarity of your inner life. In workplaces filled with competition and shifting expectations, responsibility guards against the temptation to blame. It reminds you that even if systems are flawed, Your effort and integrity remain yours. The lesson of Marcus Aurelius applies here. You may not control the empire, but you control your conduct within it. In relationships shaped by fast communication and fragile attention, responsibility asks for steadiness. It invites you to respond with care instead of reaction, to choose presence instead of distraction. Responsibility is not outdated in the age of instant messages. It is more essential than ever, for without it, connection dissolves into noise. But perhaps the greatest test of responsibility today is found in the self. Surrounded by technologies that pull us outward, it is easy to neglect the inner life. Responsibility means carving out silence, choosing reflection, and remembering that peace comes not from external validation, but from inner clarity. Here the wisdom of Frankl returns. When life feels overwhelming, when difficulties appear unjust, ask yourself, what meaning can I create from this? Responsibility is not only about action, but about interpretation. It is the art of giving shape to suffering, turning it into a ground for growth rather than despair. Responsibility also protects us from the current of the crowd. When public opinion shifts like waves, when fear or anger sweep through societies, responsibility keeps you steady. It says, you are not obliged to lose yourself in collective emotion. Your mind remains your own if you choose to hold it. This independence is not isolation, but strength. By taking responsibility for your thoughts and actions, you become more capable of contributing wisely to others. You no longer mirror the chaos around you. Instead, you carry clarity into the world. Responsibility becomes not only personal freedom, but also service to the community. Think of responsibility, then, as a bridge across time. It links emperors and prisoners, past and present, outer duty and inner freedom. It shows us that strength has never been about bending the world to our will. True strength arises when we master our own responses, moment by moment. And so we return to the question, what is power? Marcus Aurelius shows us it is not imperial command, but the responsibility to act justly despite circumstance. Viktor Frankl shows us it is not survival alone, but the responsibility to choose meaning in suffering. Both point to the same hidden strength. Responsibility is the path to freedom, because it centers you where control truly exists. It strips away illusion and returns you to the simple ground of choice. And though centuries divide us from those who taught these lessons, their truth is immediate. Responsibility is always available, always yours to claim. As this reflection ends, remember, you may never rule an empire nor endure the harshness of a camp, yet each day presents choices that quietly reveal your strength. The timeless question remains, will you claim responsibility for your own life, or hand it over to circumstance and the world around you? In that choice lies the measure of true freedom. The answer defines not only your day, but your life, and in this choice lies the quiet revelation that true power never depended on controlling the vast world around you. It has always resided in the simplest act, controlling yourself, here and now, in this very moment. In the end, true strength begins not when we seek excuses, but when we accept responsibility for each action we take. This is the timeless lesson of Stoic philosophy. Freedom is found not in control over others, but in mastery of ourselves. When we stop blaming circumstances, we discover the quiet power that has always been within us. If you found today's reflection meaningful, consider subscribing to Stoic Dhamma to continue your journey into ancient wisdom and modern clarity. Share in the comments, what is the most important responsibility you are embracing today? And stay with us, because next time we'll explore mindfulness practice, detachment from desires and material life.
References 1. Irvine, W.B., 2009. A Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy. Oxford University Press. Point 2. Pigliacci, M., 2017. How to be a Stoic, Using Ancient Philosophy to Live a Modern Life. Basic Books. Point 3. Robertson, D., 2019. How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, The Stoic Philosophy of Marcus Aurelius. St. Martin's Press.